Hi there, my name's James Kelly. Welcome back to Scott Goes Pop, and what an embarrassment of riches we've had of Scottish polling information over the last week or so, having been starved of Scottish polls during the summer. We've had three full-scale Scottish polls over the last week, two with voting intention numbers, and now we have this new YouGov poll, which is not a full-scale Scottish poll, but it is a constituency level projection of a general election result, hypothetical general election result, if it was held right now for every constituency across Great Britain. So, of course, we have quite detailed numbers for Scotland. But across Britain, Reform UK would effectively win the election with 311 seats, but that is a little bit short of an overall majority. Nevertheless, there would be no viable government that didn't involve Reform UK, so Nigel Farage would be Prime Minister. In second place would be Labour with 144 seats. The Liberal Democrats would overtake the Conservatives but would stay in third place, ironically, with 78 seats, but that's an increase on where they are now. The Conservatives would be way down to 45, the worst for the Conservatives in history, really, since the formation of the party, I would have thought. The SNP are on 37 seats, which is a good result, but it is, maybe at the lower end of some of the seats projections we've seen from various full-scale Scottish polls and also from, the YouGov subsamples that occur week by week. And I think this is quite a useful wake-up call or a useful corrective, because with the Survation poll that came out the other day, the propagandists in favour of John Swinney's independence plan, this idea that you have to needlessly put all our eggs in the basket of the SNP winning an outright majority on its own in terms of Scottish Parliament seats next year, a very unlikely feat under a proportional representation system. They were using the Survation result to say, oh, look, we're so close, because there was one seats projection that had the SNP on 63 Holyrood seats and they would need 65 for a majority. Well, this YouGov poll is a big corrective. Even though it's a Westminster poll, it's not Scottish Parliament, but it shows that the SNP would only win two-thirds of Scottish seats at Westminster. And it's not unreasonable to assume that, in a Scottish Parliament election, the constituency section, there may be, say, one-third of constituency seats that the SNP would not win. And why does that matter? Well, let's take a step back. How do you win an overall majority at Holyrood? It's only been done once. Only one party has ever done it, and that was the SNP in 2011 under Alex Salmond, but they did it to a large extent with less seats. They were nowhere close to winning an overall majority on constituency seats alone. They needed a substantial number of less seats. But to do it that way, because the allocation of list seats is the proportional aspect of the system, to be able to get to an overall majority with a large significant number of less seats, you have to be either on 50% plus in the list popular vote, or you have to be very close to it. Alex Salmond got about 45% of the list vote in 2011, and it was quite surprising that proved to be enough, but it did prove to be enough. But that route to an overall majority is now closed off for the SNP, and the reason for that is that in Holyrood polls at the moment on the list ballot, they are nowhere close to 50%. They are nowhere close to 45%. They're heading for maybe mid-20s, high 20s, low 30s. You can see maybe they could improve on that a bit, but it's very hard to see them getting beyond, say, the mid-30s. That is nowhere close to the sort of level at which a list strategy could contribute towards the SNP winning an overall majority. And because of that, because they are so far short, that means in order to sort of effectively distort the system and to get an overall majority without majority support, there is only one way of doing that, and that is by doing it essentially exclusively on constituency seats. But to win an overall majority simply through constituency seats, that means you need to win 65 out of 73 of the constituency seats. That is 90% of the constituency seats. And even under first past the post, with this distortion you get, it is phenomenally improbable that a single party is going to win 90% of the constituency seats. And that's before you even take into account anti-SNP tactical voting, which is basically what will make it impossible, make it totally impossible, not just difficult. Now, this YouGov seats projection, which is Westminster, not Holyrood, it shows the SNP winning 2/3, so that's nowhere close to the 90% they would need in constituency seats next year. And hopefully this will cause a bit of a greater sense of realism about the shortcomings of the John Swinney plan and about the need to amend it to something more sensible, which, realistically, that would mean just changing it so it's a pro-independence majority of seats that is needed, not an overall majority for a single party, which, the SNP don't actually have any right anyway to say to the Scottish people, you can only use your right to national self-determination in one way for one party. Of course, a vote for the Green Party is a vote for independence or an independence referendum if that's what's in the Green Party manifesto. And it's not for the SNP to second guess that. The reason, incidentally, that YouGov are projecting that the SNP will fail to win as many as a third of the Scottish seats at Westminster, or at least one of the reasons, or one of the main reasons, is that Reform UK are not sort of conveniently playing the role that we would like them to play, which is to split the unionist vote, but without doing any damage to the SNP. Because in fact, the Reform are projected to take 5 Scottish seats, all in the south. So let's have a look at a few specific examples. Berwickshire, Roxburgh and Selkirk, which is a seat that the SNP won, of course, in 2015 at their high watermark. But on this occasion, they're projected to be 10 points behind the Conservatives and Reform UK, who are essentially tied on 28% of the vote. And presumably, Reform UK must be fractionally ahead. Similarly, in Dumfriesshire, Clydesdale and Tweeddale, David Mundell country, Reform UK would win by 5 points. The SNP are, they were once the main challenger in that seat, but it now looks like a Reform Tory battle. Dumfries and Galloway, former seat of Alistair Jack, of course. Big win for Reform projected there, although actually the SNP, in fairness, are in second place there, so may not be a lost cause, but Reform UK on 28%, SNP 22%, Conservatives in third place on 19%. This is very much like the Southern Tory wall that existed in the 2017 election, except it's now gone to Reform because they've also got Ayr, Carrick and Cumnock in this projection. Reform do. They are on 30% of the vote in that seat. The SNP are in second place on 22%. Well, actually, they're in joint second on 22% with Labour, also on 22%, and the Conservatives who won the seat under the Ruth Davidson surge, way back in fourth place on just 12%. But the Conservatives do hold one seat, and that's in the northeast, West Aberdeenshire and Kincardine, which again is, if the SNP are going to squeeze every last drop out of the constituency ballot in the Holyrood election next year, then they're going to have to win even in places like the tough part of Aberdeenshire. And they're not doing it in this projection. The Conservatives holding the seat with 27%. The SNP not far behind on 23%, but they're having to contend with the Reform surge Reformer on 22% in that projection. But another problem for the SNP is that Labour are proving more resilient than you might expect or hope for in this projection. They're holding, I think it's 9 seats. Lothian East, which is the seat that our friend Stu said that the SNP could hold with ease, but no, Labour in this projection are on 31% of the vote. The SNP are not even in second place. Reform are in second place on 22%. The SNP way back on 17%. I think the days of the SNP winning East Lothian or Lothian East are over for the time being. Maybe in the more distant future they can get the seat back, but as part of the route to an overall majority next year, very, very doubtful. Labour are also holding Mid Lothian, although that's a very tight result. They're only 1% ahead of the SNP there. A few seats in Lanarkshire that Labour are holding. Hamilton and Clyde Valley. I mean, that sort of area has been a sort of tight three-way battle before, but this time the three-way battle is between Labour, the SNP and Reform, rather than the Conservatives. But Labour are coming out with a 2-point win over the SNP and Reform, who are tied for second there. East Kilbride and Straven, a narrow Labour win projected there. East Renfrewshire, which, I suppose in previous times you would expect to be an SNP Tory battle, but that's projected to be a Labour hold. There's also a little splash of Labour red in, well, towards sort of Clackmannanshire into Fife, Dunfermline and Dollar. And what's the other seat that Labour are projected to win in Fife? Cowdenbeath and Kirkcaldy, of course, Gordon Brown's old territory. And unfortunately, there's also a splash of, well, a number of splashes of Lib Dem orange. So that's complicating the SNP's route to a sort of blowout majority in terms of constituency seats. They're falling short of the well, it's an understatement to say they're falling short of the Liberal Democrats in North East 5. That is a landslide for the Liberal Democrats. It's being projected there. 50% for the Lib Dems, only 19% for the SNP. Mid Dumbartonshire, yeah, big win for the Liberal Democrats there. Jamie Stone's seat in the far north, Caithness, Sutherland and Easter Ross. Yeah, big win for the Liberal Democrats projected there. Barely even to look at Orkney and Shetland. We know what the story is there. I think the one place where this projection is probably going wrong, though, is in the Western Isles. All these projections always show the Western Isles being held by Labour or Nachelanen and Year. I don't know if that's the correct pronunciation. Tell me if I'm wrong. Yeah, so the projection there is Labour 31%, Reform UK 28%, SNP 16%. I think that's a misleading projection based on a misleading baseline that depended upon Angus MacNeil splitting the vote, but that's not going to be the case in future elections, or I would assume it won't be. I think the SNP will be in the running and perhaps should be favourites in that constituency. But yeah, I think I mean this is a good projection for the SNP. In the Westminster general election context, everybody would look at that and say they've completely turned the tide around. They've reversed their big setback from last year where they lost. This would be a clear win in terms of winning a majority, an overwhelming majority of Scottish constituency seats. But it does show why the John Swinney plan of how to win independence or how to get to an independence referendum, it does demonstrate why in the current circumstances it's just not a runner and why it really needs to be amended as a matter of desperate urgency at the SNP conference next month. Anyway, that's it for now. If you're enjoying this content, please subscribe to my YouTube channel and I'll see you later.